As with all aspects of modern life, AI is rapidly changing higher education. Students are using it to read, write, and problem solve. Educators and administrators are using it to transform how they teach and design courses. Joining me now on the Future of Workers newsletter and podcast to look at the changes underway, how they are being implemented, and what that means for students and their futures is Dr. Bridget Burns, CEO of the University Innovation Alliance. Bridget, thank you very much for joining me.
It's delightful to be here. I'm excited to have the conversation with you.
I want to start by, I think earlier this summer, you were in Congress. You were talking to them about this very subject. And I recall that you said, and I'm going to look here on my paper, higher education doesn't have an AI innovation problem. It's more of a coordination and diffusion problem. What did you
Yep.
mean by that?
Well, because I feel like it's like a thousand different conversations are happening simultaneously. A lot of them are duplicative, but there is no one who is connecting the dots across the sector when there are insights around literacy, safety, and privacy, or coalescing us together. Because there is no need to have a thousand conversations. There is a way for all of those people to be, bringing their wisdom collectively, but there is no kind of model that is intentionally trying to curate and identify the shared problems and the big things that we should be teaming up on, because there are very serious shared problems when it comes to how institutions are navigating, considering any of these hyperscalers, or whatever people call them, hyperscalers, but just these AI providers. I would, the large scale language models like OpenAI and Gemini and Claude. Campuses have no idea how to even make the decisions about how to do AI, how to set up policies, how to support and integrate and actually navigate the work. And AI does not map over top an org chart. It is a new space, and I just kind of feel like my message is essentially like the emperor has no clothes. That none of us is an actual expert. Even the loud first social media influencer types who have been the first to grab the microphone and talk about AI as if they have been working on it for years. We are all learning collectively. And when you do collective learning, but you're all having like this 1,000 separate repeated conversations, it's a missed opportunity, because students need us to actually coalesce around clear standards for how we're going to protect student data, clear standards for how we're going to actually ensure AI literacy, not just for CS majors, but for every student. Our faculty and our administrators, they need to know that they're not just their data, but also their prompts are now kind of intellectual contributions. How are we going to protect those as a field? How are we going to navigate this moment? So for me, I see a lot of work happening, and I think that somebody should actually create a room that all those conversations flow through. K-12 has already done this. They've done an excellent job. There's something called the EdSafe Alliance, which integrates school districts, superintendents, ed tech, experts on literacy and learning. They coalesce around clear standards to protect students. And I would say K-12 is way out ahead as a result.
So there's like what, 4,000 plus higher ed campuses, I believe.
4 to 7,000, depending on what you measure.
Yeah, and then right, you got 2 years, 4 years. So how do you? I mean, is there just no body that oversees all that, or should it be the federal government? I mean, who should be that coordinator?
Well, if the federal government does it, which is what I picked up on in my testimony, is I think that the federal government is going to want to try and regulate the institutions rather than the AI providers, which is wrong. I think that you're trying to get at the provider. Why doesn't someone just actually come up with some reasonable safety, privacy, and literacy standards? Well, safety and privacy, at least for the providers. There are some very clear areas where there's bipartisan consensus in Congress, and I can talk about those, where don't regulate the institution, be regulating the providers. But we don't know how to do that yet, because we're all making up our expertise, right? And so, but I want to make sure to answer your question. The reason that no one's technically in charge, right? Because higher ed, as broad as the tent is in terms of types and size of institution, it is innately built on this perceived idea of the threat of competition, the idea that everyone is that we're all competing for students, for resources, for attention, for opportunities, for grants. And the truth is it's kind of artificial because students aren't actually looking at all of your institutions. They aren't, a lot of students, especially low income and first generation, they're going to make decisions based on their local geography, right? They're not really, at least that's how I was. And I also just think it's where the waste comes from because we then kind of hunker down and we don't share ideas and we don't kind of coalesce together. We don't talk about the things that we have in common. It's just a natural thing that we pit these institutions against each other. It's part of their design. So as a result, AI is starting to be treated as a competitive advantage, which I think is a huge disservice. Because if it is a distinguishing characteristic and a differentiator, then you will see no sharing of insights. People are going to have to reinvent the wheel, every campus. How am I going to use AI for proactive advising? How am I going to use AI for systems improvement? How am I going to use AI when it comes to instructional design? We should not be doing that. We should actually find ways to work together. And there's a million different, I mean, millions is hyperbole. There are a lot of different organizations, and we often engage in defending our turf to some degree, making sure that we are relevant and we provide value. And I understand that. Like, I'm not critiquing anyone. Like, I also have a job to do and I have institutions to serve, but someone has to be like pausing and peeking up and looking around and noticing this feels wasted. And also, I don't think this is the most effective way for us to serve students, given that AI providers are, they're going to $1 billion plus entities and they're going to make a profit. And there's some serious issues around whether or not they're capitalizing and exploiting student data for profit. And that is one of the areas that there is congressional bipartisan consensus that they do not believe that should be happening. And if we are all separated and tinkering in silos, then I think Congress is going to try and regulate institutions to be the ones to make sure that's true, that AI providers are not using our student data and exploiting it for commercial purposes. And that is not something that we can physically even, like, we can write a contract about that, but we don't know.
Right.
But you could actually legislate, you could actually oversee the AI providers. You should have to do certain things to be able to sell in the public sector. There should be some standards of care expectations. So I think we're figuring this out, but because there is not an entity, yes, the federal government technically, but they're going to bring the hammer down on the campus.
Policies, right? That is, I think you brought up a really good point. Is who, I've had this conversation with other people in like the business sector. Who's in charge? Who's in charge of setting these goalposts and protections? And we have, I would say, think about it. There's a lot of local governments and schools in that. There's certain contracts that they do not sign unless there are agreements. So,
and that's actually one of the huge risks because if there are risks, which there are, universities in particular are very risk averse. And so you're going to find that some institutions have not, and they still have not. I know many they don't feel like they are allowed to because their state system. They will not sign a contract with any of these providers. And so their students do not have access. They're going to have to pay out of pocket, which means that now, they're probably definitely not going to have the protections that we think they need around, again, safety, privacy. And I also just really, my biggest worry is rural, underserved institutions that don't have a lot of resources. If their students are being educated in an AI world, but they don't have access to it, and they're not being given the same opportunities as others, when they graduate, their degree is going to be less valuable. So now you are creating an even greater gap. And I think that's what I worry about is if you had coordination across the sector where we were actually figuring out how you should be doing these things, how to protect students, how to protect the data for our faculty and administrators, et cetera, I think you would have a better chance of looking out for those institutions.
And the University Innovation Alliance, how many universities are part of your system now, and what are you guys doing around this area?
So we are 19, and before I go for, I will say this is a self-formed network of institutions. It started as 11, and we never planned on getting any bigger. This was, a group of presidents who wanted to try and figure out if they could actually collaborate as opposed to compete. It did work. They were successful at achieving a very significant goal of producing more than 160,000 more graduates than they were expected to. And after that, we had to try and figure out, okay, well, then who would we add if we added more institutions? But that has never been the goal. The goal was actually to figure out how to be the national lab for this sector, to innovate quickly, prove it out, scale it, and give away everything we learn. And so that's really what we focus on. And so my job is to really stand in between the institutions, to never get too close to any one of them. I don't want to drink any Kool-Aid. I want to stay super objective. I want to be able to see the institutions and their behavior and what works, and try and help translate and do shuttle diplomacy between them so that they can actually work on big projects, big, problem solving, big goals together. And in AI, I stand in the center, and what I see is we have some of the most innovative leading institutions in AI. I have ASU is the first to sign a enterprise AI contract with OpenAI. I also have Purdue, which is the very first institution to require AI literacy in graduation requirements. So therefore, we have that end, but we also have institutions who are still struggling to figure out how to, evaluate these different providers. How should they do this work? And so we have kind of the whole spectrum. And our job, really is always like, what problems do we have in common, and how can we solve those together? And then can those actually be useful for the sector? One early proof point, they were all struggling with how to navigate these contracts. These are really complicated. It's a different type of technology. It's not a technology. It's not just like you hand it to your IT team and your contract evaluation team. And no, it's not like that. It's much more complicated. The knowledge just simply didn't exist. And so we started coalescing, what are the questions? How do you evaluate these? And we released in November, I think, a vendor diagnostic guide to help institutions. And we used an instructional design approach to, like, step by step, here's how you evaluate these. It was just free on Google. It's a Google Doc in my account. And already 160 institutions have used that. And I just am trying to update it right now and release that. Just some new things have happened in the market. But the best thing is, when I was at JFF, we met with the team at Anthropic, and the lead for higher education let me know that that Anthropic used our guide to actually inform the design of the contract-based language that they are sharing. So that's exactly how the UI should work, is that we should solve a problem together, it should help the rest of the sector, give it away, provide it so that other institutions can use it. We don't think that we're better than anyone. We're just trying to operate like a laboratory environment. So that's one.
And one of the things, kind of getting to the student outcomes, the impact on students, the idea that maybe, you can't turn your back on AI, of course, because it's here, it's in all our lives. And it could be used to help individualize some of the education programs. Are you seeing anything out there yet on that, kind of shifting gears on that?
Yeah. There's incredible promise. The stuff that people are doing, they're figuring out. They're small pilots, and that's what I'm thinking about, is how do you actually make it easy for people to learn from each other's experiments? So when I went to UC Riverside, and I talked about this in my testimony, that the very first program that had the first evidence of AI was showing up in writing programs because students were using it. And it's actually quite difficult to then, how do we get to learning outcomes if now we have this threat? It's beyond just the contract analysis. And so they actually developed, using AI, a tool to actually help coach students using a Socratic method to get them to kind of use a process of inquiry to get to the right questions, and not make it so easy to just use AI for that. So that's a good example. There's so many different ones I'm hearing at ASU, but other institutions are all in different ways. They're using AI to try and figure out these long these challenges that we've had for a long time. And it is really, at the end of the day, the North Star is personalized learning at scale. Can we get there? And I think we can. But I think we have to wrestle with some of these bigger sector coordination issues if we're going to do it. Because I don't think any one campus, as amazing as any one campus could be, I don't think they're going to solve for this in the way that will be useful at other campuses, if we don't figure out how to coordinate and ensure that the learning in one place is actually broadly shared.
Yeah, I think and that authentic learning that the students are actually learning. So the University of California Riverside example, they're trying to figure out how to inform the student. Yeah, you can use it if it helps, but you have to make sure you're learning it, because then you have to assess it, right? So if you're trying to attach this to, careers, and somebody walks out of a university with a degree of some sort, you have to make sure they know what they're doing, and I think that's another challenge for you, though.
Yeah. I mean, I think, but so part of this is it's a tool. AI is a tool. It is magnifying existing problems. We've always struggled to measure learning. And
Sure.
now we have cell phone addiction, we have screen time, we have shorter attention spans. We needed to wrestle with this anyway. I do think that AI will be a helpful tool if we deploy it well and we don't treat it as a competitive advantage and try and gatekeep. If we actually pull together and start organizing ourselves around national challenges, the way that other countries are inviting people to tackle national problems using AI instead of everyone try and hunker down and be the most AI university you can. But I think some of these bigger challenges around translating into the workforce, how do we actually, I mean, we're seeing some really good stuff like Work Plus at ASU. They're using AI to evaluate and interrogate all of the existing position descriptions for students who are doing on campus jobs. Now, you remember an on campus job, card swipe or something like that. You weren't learning a lot, you weren't doing a lot, right? Those are for if AI is happening in the way that it is and it's playing out in the marketplace, it's very likely that students' only job and their only chance at employment and work-based learning or work integrated learning is going to be on-campus employment, and it has to be high quality. And if you think that's going to happen naturally, you're wrong. It's just absolutely going to require a strategic approach. So they create this thing called Work Plus where they redesign all the on-campus jobs, but they're using AI to actually look for skill coding and looking specifically at the kinds of proficiencies and what kinds of skills employers are going to be looking for, and how do we actually modify the existing position descriptions for these on-campus student-facing jobs so that we can start doing that skill development while they're a student instead of hoping an internship gives it to them, because there just simply aren't going to be enough internships to meet the market need.
That actually gives me hope, and it made me flash back to my own on-campus experience. I think I sat in a hallway and watched people go by for some reason, and I can't even remember why. But that was my campus learning experience. But this actually gives me some hope that if they're trying to rethink this and help people get those skills before they graduate, in a practical way, I think that's good. Um, okay, what about you? Are you optimistic? Let's end on your final thoughts. Are you optimistic that this is all going to be figured out?
I believe in the people who've been here and who've pledged their lives to this field, who care about students. I think that we will find our way through. I think that it's new and awkward and we're bumping into each other and we're going to make some mistakes. And I think the question is, how long are we going to let that happen? And are we going to just kind of, can we just actually like, hey, everyone, let's all, can I have your attention? Like, let's rally, let's pull together. There's actually some things that we could be doing together instead of everyone kind of heading to their corner. I'm so optimistic. This will be our first chance to actually measure learning in the way that we never have been able to. I think that we can actually achieve personalized learning at scale. I think that we can reimagine the classroom experience to be far more active learning, far more flipped, and way better in terms of how we help different types of learners learn. I also think that Michael Crow has talked about how like there's every student who's a PhD student is going to write 5 dissertations, right? Like there's so much more discovery that we can do as long as we figure out how we're going to conduct ourselves. How are we going to cite and attribute? How are we going to treat the AI models, how are we going to, treat each other. I think that with the work integrated learning space, this is going to be a chance for us to actually tackle some of these bigger issues that we've always needed to deal with. I mean, the degree needed to better align with the workforce. This is giving us an excuse where you literally cannot ignore it any longer. We are going to need to do a reset on expectations. We need to build out ways to reskill people who are affected by AI layoffs. I think that we as a society are going to have to think about what do we think the profits from AI, where do we think they should go to do? Should they be used for more billionaires, or should they be used to actually address the problems that will emerge? And how do we be fair about that? And how do we actually be smart and strategic? I think there's just like, it's exciting, and the progress for me right now I've just seen is really incredible. The ways that another example is whether it's transfer, articulation, and credit accumulation, big problems that have always been an issue. Now you can figure out if a credit is equivalent, which used to take 15 minutes, in like 30 seconds. There's ways that we can do stuff with AI that's going to be really transformative for students.
Bridget, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.